Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter. Of course, you can subscribe to the channel Let's Talk Boxing. First and foremost, I want to welcome all of the new subscribers and, of course, all of the existing subscribers for all your fantastic feedback over the course of the last week. We got so many new people jump on the channel following all the work we did for the Inoue-Fulton fight. A brilliant fight between two top-level fighters, and Inoue showed just how special he was that night. Well, we've got another special fight on our hands as the Truth ERROL Spence goes up against Terence "Bud" Crawford for the undisputed welterweight championship of the world. Two elite level fighters that really excel in different areas overall. There is one key area where I think there is some overlap, and we'll talk about that and how that could be a determining factor. We'll talk about some of the key areas where either guy can potentially exploit and win the fight, because this is on paper a 50-50 fight, and we'll come up with a prediction at the end of the video. First and foremost, let's start off discussing Errol Spence Jr. You know, when it comes to fighters like Errol Spence, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for them, almost a special amount of respect above other types of fighters, because he wasn't really born with these incredible natural physical athletic attributes. Okay, this is something that Derek James openly speaks about, so this is not some sort of slight on Errol Spence. It's a compliment, because the fact that he doesn't have one punch knockout power, the fact that he doesn't have these fast twitch muscles, you're never going to see him land this leaping left hook that nobody sees coming, you know, double left hook or double uppercuts. He's not Roy Jones out there, and yet he's still able to become this elite level fighter. It shows how destructive he can be in the process of breaking you down through mastering certain tactical and technical elements of his game. His execution of the fundamentals is superb. From range, his jab is his main weapon, really. He's very, very active with it. So not only is it an excellent jab, he doesn't stop throwing it. And so you're dealing with this weapon which is consistent and so difficult to bypass. And he can vary what he does off of that jab. So often he'll step in quite deep with the jab and follow up with the backhand. And when he lands that backhand, he can be destructive and just pull straight out afterwards, or he can collapse the pocket and come inside. And when he comes inside, that's when he's really going to work. That's his bread and butter. That's where he starts to manipulate you. He starts using throwaway shots to create openings. He's bumping you to keep you off balance. He's pinning you. He's affecting your guard. We'll get into that later on. But the other methods in which he uses his jab is sometimes to land the jab and then pull out. He did that excellently early in the fight against Danny Garcia, and he did it brilliantly against Mikey Garcia too. And it prevented the pocket from being formed. And so whilst that is his best attribute, being in the pocket, he doesn't have to fight like that. He can out-jab you and outwork you with the jab. And all of that has to do with his ability to technically execute that jab so fantastically. And one of the things that he does as well is use his limbs in a terrific way to protect himself. He uses them as shields, whether that means hiding the chin behind the shoulder. And I think this is a Derek James introduction, because it's something that Jamel Charlo does too. Jamel will often tilt his head slightly to the side, but put his chin on that shoulder, almost like he's lying on his own shoulder, like a pillow at times, and he'll shoot from there and work from there. And you'll see that Errol Spence uses that very, very well as well. His own limbs, whether he's going to throw up a shot to catch it, whether he's going to tuck his chin behind the shoulder when he's going to throw a jab, he uses that well. Here are some clips to show you exactly what it is that I'm talking about here. See how he tucks that chin really behind that shoulder, and that shoulder would have already been lifted before he threw the jab. And if you just look further down as well, he's crouching here and shooting the jab in an upward trajectory, and again he's hiding behind the shoulder. This actually all came as part of an adjustment here against Kell Brook, because Kell was landing the jab and then pulling back from the attempted counter jab from Spence. Then Kell would counter that attempted counter jab with the jab over the top. And he was having a lot of success with that. And so Spence made an adjustment in this fight, and he'd throw the initial jab and then actually come low. And so that when Kell was looking for that counter jab, he was actually allowing Spence an entry to the body with the backhand. And from there, he would engage basically with an up jab and then start ripping the body. And it was a key adjustment that he made. But you can see how defensively responsible he is with his chin here. If an opponent was to slip to the outside and throw a wide hook, the chin is protected by the shoulder. Here as well, you see as Kell tries to bring that right hand into play, you see that he throws that forearm up, that elbow up, and he's created a barrier from which he's hiding behind. He's twisting away from it as well. So these are the sorts of things he does where he throws up his limbs. If you go back to the video, Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas, technical preview and prediction, you'll see that I'm also showing you clips where he even does it with hooks. Look at the way that his chin is hidden behind the shoulder. So some really good defensively responsible stuff there from Errol Spence. And in terms of what Spence is capable of doing on the inside, just to show you this is not just a guy who's a bully and a physical phenomenon on the inside, but is actually highly intelligent, a puppeteer pulling your strings, making you do what he wants you to do and always being a step ahead. I want to show you a couple of clips. First and foremost, let's pick it up against Yordenis Ugas, where he's going to lead with this backhand uppercut followed by a right hook. He lands the uppercut, then comes a right hook, and then look at where it ends up. He's actually grabbing the wrist stroke forearm of Ugas after he's thrown this two-piece. He's already thinking about how he's going to stay in the pocket and go for the next phase of attack whilst manipulating Ugas. He pulls him in, and when he does that, he puts his head in a safe outside position. He's outside of the shoulder here. Now, not only is he safe, but Ugas feels as though he's safe, even though Spence has the advantage here, having the hand on top of the wrist of Ugas. But what does he do from here? He bumps Ugas, and that creates slight separation. And as he's pulled his head back, whilst that separation occurs, he throws a short left hook to where his head was, where Spence's own head was. So where Ugas felt safe, thinking, okay, I'm on the outside shoulder now, he's landed at two-piece, he's pulled me down, but I'm not in a position of danger. That bump, getting Ugas off balance and creating separation, created the opening for the next left hook to come. From there, he throws another uppercut, which lifts Ugas, and he comes low and throws a straight backhand into the solar plexus. Every opening, every gap was created by Errol Spence. Now, when we look at this second sequence, you're going to see more manipulation of the opponent, more complete control on the inside. First and foremost, I want you to look at the feet of Errol Spence. Neither guy is in a really advantageous position here, but as it plays along, you see that Errol Spence shifts his feet and he brings that left foot to the position that his right foot was in, which brings the right foot further behind Ugas, and now he has a complete side-on position against Ugas. Ugas is not in a position to punch here. His balance is all off. So as he seeks to readjust, Spence has actually got overhooks on his wrist. Now, really, you want to have the overhooks over the elbow. You can actually break out when it's where the wrist is. Nonetheless, positionally speaking, Errol is in a good position here. And because he's low and he's leaning on Ugas, Ugas doesn't really have the wide enough stance in order to lean back and throw with that backhand. So what does Errol do from there? He quickly shifts his body with a little slapping left hook just to create more chaos and to try and shift Ugas into a more advantageous position. And from there, he's enabling himself, as Ugas is seeking to reset, to get his leg in between the squared on stance of Ugas, and he's created leverage. You see how he's got his shoulder into the chest of Ugas and he's got his arms pinned. Ugas needs to break out of this. He needs to create some sort of separation, or perhaps try and get his weight above Errol Spence to lean down on him, because he needs a referee to say break. He's not in a position where he can do anything here. As it plays along, look at that quick little swivel from Errol Spence. He steps around with that back leg, but the lead leg's heel is where he swiveled to create really good positioning for himself. And look at Ugas's arms, they're still pinned. There's nothing he can do. He's still jostling to try and get into position. Spence then throws a shot underneath the elbow. It's really a low blow. It hits the hip. But what he's trying to do there, after he walks him back and get him off balance, is to get Ugas worried about the shots that are coming around the elbow. And from there, he's then able to throw that wide hook. Ugas spots that and comes underneath it. So what does Errol Spence do from here? He adjusts by bringing his feet a little bit further back just to create leverage in order to go again. And he throws that little right hand uppercut just to touch the chest of Ugas. And that enables him to create more leverage because it's touching higher up on the chest of Ugas and then creating that opening below. And that's when he really sits on the uppercut. He's finding gaps, he's finding openings. And from here, as he steps back out, look at how he's got his stance. He's ready to throw again. Ugas has his weight shifted over that lead leg. He's in a position of no man's land here, and he's really set up for an uppercut because he's leaning forward. Instead though, Spence decides to go for another hook towards the ribs. And as Spence finishes the shot, he comes in a little bit lower. Again, it looks as though he's got his head on the cheek of Ugas, and he pulls his head back and throws a very short hook, exactly where his own face was. He uses his face to cover the shot that's coming, and he lands it flush on Ugas. From there, he takes half a step back, keeping his base beneath him and finishing it off with a beautiful uppercut. He's devastating, and he's a manipulator on the inside. So it's evident that Errol Spence is supreme on the inside. However, we also have to note that Ugas is the sort of fighter that will have that high guard and bend forward and almost curl up, shell up, almost like a turtle shell. So he's making himself this ball of impenetrable mass. And when you're trying to find gaps and it's difficult to find gaps, he then explodes into these powerful counter shots, these pot shots, and it's there where he looks to have real success with Errol Spence, because as I showed you, he's able to affect your balance and manipulate your guard. Ugas was in a position where he's trying to shell up and absorb these sorts of punches, but then he's never really allowed to set and come back with something of his own. So he ends up getting caught in the wheelhouse of Errol Spence, and it's like being caught in a washing machine or something. You're just going for a spin and there's nothing you can do, and it's just getting worse and worse for you. Bud's a little bit different though. Bud Crawford is also fantastic on the inside, and he doesn't get credit for this. He's not quite as adept as Errol Spence, I don't believe, when it comes to being destructive, but he's very cute in there. He's a thinking fighter. You know, often he'll get caught with the first shot of a guy who's on the inside. You saw this with Avanesian, you saw it with Sean Porter at times, you saw it with Mean Machine, but he'll instantly read that and react, and he'll land his own shot in return. He might roll with a punch that might land more flush than he would have hoped, but by moving and rolling with that shot, he's ready to throw something back. And I believe it was against Avanesian actually, where he sort of rolled and threw an uppercut followed by a right hook, which ended the fight. So when you're punching against him, even if you land that first phase of attack, you're still in danger. And if you're not in danger, he's still able, with those fantastic feet of his, to get out, pivot out. He's not a sitting stationary target like Ugas, which is going to enable you to just bump him and move him around the ring. It's different. Now, I have seen on a couple of occasions, of course, body shots affect him. Mean Machine dropped him with a body shot. It wasn't given as a knockdown. Even Avanesian at one point landed a left hook to the ribs, and you just saw his elbow come down a little bit, and then he stepped out of that pocket. And I think he felt that shot. And at 35 years old, trying to make the weight, getting bigger and older and stuff like that, I do wonder whether Errol Spence is going to be able to get on the inside, find those gaps, pick those shots, and start to affect Terence Crawford. But in order to be in that pocket and work against Bud, you're going to be getting caught with powerful counter shots. He's not as active as Spence, so he could be getting outworked, but he's a bigger individual puncher, I believe. And so even if Spence is landing these one or two, if Bud has the feet, and we know one of his best weapons, one of his best attributes, as I've said on this channel, is his agility. It's that ability to just take this little hop step back and stay in stance or change the angle on you. Those little moves that he does where he's able to throw a punch where you think, I'm about to collapse the pocket, I'm about to tie up or something like that, and all of a sudden there's a new angle and he's throwing punches at you and he's leaning back and shots are whizzing by his face and he starts exchanging with you. You're in danger when he's in that sort of position. And so for Spence to be in an area where he really needs to shine, he's actually going into hellfire. So there's real threat there for Spence, regardless of where the fight's happening around the ring. And the reason I say this is because at range, although Spence is very technically astute, and it could be argued that from a technical perspective, he throws his punches and defends more correctly than Bud Crawford. But Bud is probably the best tactician in the entire sport of boxing. The adjustments he makes, I don't think there's anybody else like him in the sport. And often what he'll do is look at your early patterns, compute them. I know there's that cliche of downloading data, but he does seem to do that, and get on the back foot to try and stay safe. And early on, you can actually get to Bud Crawford. We saw him getting out-jabbed by Kell Brook, for instance, and eventually he realized, I think it was the fourth round, that he had to adjust and switch to southpaw. In fact, he did it in the third, and even that round, I felt that Kell Brook was the one that was winning that round. But when the knockout came, you saw that they were standing up with each other, and Kell, they're engaging lead hands, and Kell seeks to step inside of the lead hand in order to land his own shot, and Bud just times him with this very short right hand. He's thinking ahead of time. He's waiting for him. He knows this guy's timing might even be better than mine when it comes to the jab. So I'm going to have to adjust here and time him in another way, in another area. And this is the thing. He's got so many strings to that bow. A, B, C, D. So is Errol Spence going to be able to collapse the pocket, even with those fantastic fundamentals at range, against the guy who moves so well and changes the angle so well? You saw Amir Khan at one point as well trying to run in on Terence Crawford, and you just saw him take a step back, arms up in the air as he's moving backwards just to create obstacles, barriers in front of you. And Khan's trying to throw these shots desperately at him, and he's just taking 1-2 steps back, pivoting out at an angle, and all of a sudden Khan has to reset, and even that faster lineal entry wasn't enough to get at Terence Crawford. Is Spence going to be fast enough to get at him? Because if he's not, he's going to have a real problem, because not only is Bud the sort of guy that can step out of range quickly and change the angle, he punches off of that. So as you start to try to land on him, if you're falling short and you start to commit a little bit more, he's potentially going to time you. And one of the things that Errol Spence does is when he throws that backhand and he's going to step in, he'll often bring his head down slightly, but he lines it up with the opposing shoulder. And what could potentially happen when he's up against Bud Crawford, who's very, very good with those short-timed hooks, is that as that jab is thrown and Spence is stepping in and his head comes to this sort of area here, Bud's the sort of guy, particularly if he switches to southpaw, where he can take half a step back, see that, and throw this very short right hand and start timing the entry of Errol Spence and landing those hooks on him. And that will not turn out well for Errol Spence if that starts to happen. In addition to that, the way in which Errol Spence uses his jab is essentially to be destructive. It's either point scoring or it's to set up other bigger powerful shots, collapse the pocket, dictate range. Bud uses it a little bit differently. There's overlap between what Bud Crawford does with his lead hand and what Shakur Stevenson does. Don't get me wrong, he can use it as a thudding jab, right? And remember, I think he's better as a southpaw than he is as orthodox, although he's brilliant with both. But you'll often see him from a southpaw stance, for instance. He'll often just put it out there and touch you and mix it up with a powerful jab. But from there, he affects you. You saw an awful lot with Sean Porter lunging in with those big shots. He'll hook his head and push him to the side. So in the same way that Spence was manipulating the guard of Ugas in that clip that I showed you, Bud Crawford's the sort of guy that will literally grab somebody's head and manipulate their head. He uses his head control and he gets you off balance from that. The other thing that he does, the Shakur Stevenson type of move, is that he'll put it in your eye line, and when it's there, he'll then shoot the backhand to the solar plexus. He's trying to affect your vision, basically. And if you try to react to that, he will work off of that. Rigondeaux was another guy who was brilliant at doing that. So the battle of the jabs is interesting because you've got one who's very consistent and more destructive with the jab, but you've got the other who uses their lead hand to control the opponent. Who wins that will start to determine what goes on from there. If it's Bud Crawford that's winning that battle, you're going to see that Errol Spence is going to have to start running red lights. He's going to have to start taking risks, and that might not bode well for him. But it's not just Spence that has an area he really has to win. Bud Crawford is very physically strong. We've spoken about this in the past. He has that wrestling background. He's capable of tying fighters up, completely nullifying them from working on the inside. Against Avanesian, when he was in positions where he was uncomfortable, he was literally just pushing him away, which Avanesian then had to reset and try and come back at him. If Bud, as strong as he is, finds that Spence is too big, too strong, and he can't keep him away and tie him up inside the pocket, and he's getting outworked in the pocket, well then he better be able to maintain range, because if he can't, he's going to end up in serious trouble. So how do I think this fight will go? I think early on in the fight, it will be Errol Spence that builds up a lead, more active with the jab, working very hard as Bud tries to time him, tries to read his patterns. Eventually, I think Bud is likely to do that and start to land some bigger flusher shots. Will he have enough to take Errol Spence out? I think with the X factor that he's got, I'm leaning more towards Bud finding a moment of excellence, but I wouldn't be stunned if Spence holds out and wins on points. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.